Good evening, everyone. Today's session is on arrays. Let us understand what is the motivation behind that, why there is a requirement of arrays, and how to use them in our programming concepts. What are the advantages of using the arrays? And let us see one of the program also through which you can understand how we use array indexes, array elements in our program, right? So let's begin with the session. First of all, what is the motivation behind arrays? Why we are using arrays? So suppose how you are going to organize 100 students objects, right? Suppose you are having the marks of 100 students. Now every time not you are not going to save it anywhere. You want some data structure which is storing all the marks of these 100 students, right? And 100 different objects names, right? Suppose I am talking about there are one memory location where you have stored one student details, another memory location you have stored another. How you are going to use them in future? How much addressing you are going to do that, right? You are not going to, basically they are not organized for these types of questions. For these types of reasons, we require the data structure, that is arrays, right? Organize data for efficient access. The first and very, you may say, useful feature for efficient access, like you have 100 records in a consecutive memory location, and they all have the homogeneous type of data. Now, what is a class? Different data types in one object. You may be having a student name, you may be having a student marks, you may be having a student mobile number. So, everything. Name is characters, mobile number is again, you may have a string, or marks you may be taking as a number or integers. Array, multiple objects of the same time. Now, what do you mean by same type? When we are talking about same time, it is a collection of homogeneous data types. Like if you are going to store the marks, that means all the marks are of integer values. You cannot have name in between them, right? So this is the usage of arrays. When we have a homogeneous collection of data, we will be using arrays. Let us see, we have number of times understood what is an array, and in my previous sessions also you have seen what are the different data structures we have. So the first data structure and very important data structure we have is array. Now let us see what are the features of this array, how to use, how what is index, how they are used in our programs. It is a symbol name for a collection of data values. So you may be storing, I told you, 100 marks, 100 student details in single record, in single data structure, right? So you may be using array, all of the same data type. You cannot have like marks in some string type, or you have some marks in some other data type. All the marks will be in one data type, that is integers. Then we have is subscript notation to identify one of the values. So whenever we have to access any value, any item from that array, I may be using the subscript or indexing part. We will be understanding the indexing part in the later chapter. Like suppose I want to access the index, the marks which is an index A10. Yeah, array name and then 10. So directly you can access it, right? So random access is very much possible in this part. A carryover from earlier programming languages. So you may be understanding like it is continuously in other programming languages. We are also using the arrays concept. More than a primitive type, less than an object. It's like primitive type, data type, it's a data structure basically, and less than an object because it is not holding all the data types in a single data structure. It is only the homogeneous type of data in a data structure. Like objects, when used as a method, parameters and return types do not have or use inheritance. You cannot inherit the array, right? You cannot use it like that. Accessing, we will be like implementing all this concept in a program. Accessing each of the values in an array. So you can access, I told you, you can access the values of an array by using the index of that particular element. Like suppose there is an array of 100 data items and I want to access it A90. You maybe access that directly. Random access is very much possible. So this is the efficient organization of data. You may organize the data efficiently. Then we have, let us see one program, how to use arrays. What is the syntax of array? And like what are the things that we can have in our arrays, right? The first part is journal index for declaring an array. What is the basically what is the syntax of defining an array? The first part is you have the base type, the type of the data items in the array, then array name, space array name, and then you put, like earlier we will be using, or in C programming language we will be using new, and then again what is the type of the array, and then length or size of the items in the array, right? Like suppose, for example, the first example talks about 80 elements array with the base type char, right? The array is basically consisting of all the elements that are of type character, right? So char, no size is mentioned here. You are just defining the what, the array name, and then we have is new, again one keyword for defining the character set of how many, what is the size of that array, that is 80, right? Again I have taken the doubles or floating point numbers, in which we have taken double, the size is double, and then reading is the array name, and then we have new double, and 100 elements we have in this. Then 70 elements of array species. So specimen we may have species kind of thing, in which again the same syntax is there. You are maintaining the species of 70 elements. Then we have, there are three ways to use these brackets, right? Let us understand one by one. With an array name, declaring an array, when you define an array, you define it like as int a and closing bracket and opening bracket. And again like when it creates a name of type int array. Let me give you some examples, like types int and int with array are different. So one is holding a simple single value, one that is types int. Another is holding a array of elements, right? So when you have square brackets, that means it is an array. Whereas when you just write the int, it is single value you are going to define, individual values you are defining it. Let us take an example. You create a new array, pressure is equal to new int 100. So you have created one array, that is the name of the array is pressure, and how many elements does this array is holding? That is 100, right? To refer to a specific element in the array, we may be using the index. So I am again and again repeating the same thing. We are going to use the indexes for accessing the elements in the array. So suppose we have taken the input from the user, some value from the user, and using the Java printing command, we are printing the values on the screen. Right. Now, what is this pressure? 3. So, the element, the value on the array, that is 3. That is going to be printed on the screen. Right. This is how basically we can use square brackets in different ways. right? Again, I am repeating the same thing. The first is when we have the square brackets with some data type, that means it's an array. If we want to access the, if you want to define it or to create an array, we will be using square bracket. The last thing is to access an element using an index. Let's see one example. Some array terminologies. The temperature is the array name. N plus 2. N is what? Now whatever is written in the subscript, now whatever is written in this square bracket is treated as a subscript. So subscript may it is written n is what? N is the size, or you may say any index number, you may take it, plus 2. So you are giving, you are adding the value with that 2. Then we have is indexed temperature n plus 2. Indexed value, also called an element or subscript variable. I told you whenever we have to access the subscript, that is given in the square bracket. Then we have is this temperature, the value of the indexed variable or also an element of the array. Right. So note, element may be referred to either single indexed variable in the array or the value in the single indexed array. So what is that basically? It is a variable also, or you may taking the value. So you may take it according to your usage. It could be either variable in the array or it could be value in the array, right? Now let us see how we define the array length, specified by the number of numbers in the bracket. So I told you whenever we define the array size, it is defined like in the second statement, pressure is equal to new int 100. So 100 is what? 100 are the length, or you may say size of the array, right? What are the number of elements we have specified in the bracket and when we create it with new. So that's what I was showing. Maximum number of elements in the array the can hold. So it is beyond 100 you cannot go. It's like that. Like in the given example, beyond 20 it cannot go. So you can have 20 elements in the array. Storage is allocated whether or not the elements are assigned values. So it is the disadvantage of array whether you are putting the values in that array or not. But if you have defined it with 20, 100 or whatever the size you have defined, that means that much amount of space is allocated in the memory. Right, even because this space is allocated at the compile time itself. It is not allocated at the runtime as we have in linked list. So this is the main disadvantage, and the advantage is with linked list where we have less or no wastage of memory. And with arrays we have wastage of memory. Because of this reason only at the compile time it is going to allocate the space, right? The length attribute is established in the declaration and cannot be changed unless the array is redeclared. So suppose you have declared it with 20 elements, you cannot change it. Why? Because you have defined that we have defined the array, that is entry, and this entry has the size, the length of this array is 20. If you want to change it, you may redefine it. You may redefine it with in the next statement with some, like if you want to have 10 only, if you want to increase it, you may increase it also. If you want to decrease it, you may decrease it also. So basically it is at that time it is going to work, right? Now let us see what are the subscript ranges we have, how to define it. Array subscripts use zero numbering. The first element is treated as 0. Subscript is 0. The second element has 1 and so on. Right? The last element has the subscript length minus 1. Why it is length minus 1? Because it is starting from 0. Right? For example, an int array with 4 elements. So you have the size that is 3. So you have the first element 0, 1, 2, 3. So you have this thing, like this thing we define it. This is the very very important slide where you need to understand about how we access the element using indexes. So the first index is A0. That is holding the value 97. The second index is A1. That is holding the value 86 and so on. Right? Let us see some errors that we may face in some languages. Using a subscript larger than length causes a runtime or not a compile time error. So when you are compiling the compiler is not going to show the error. But whenever you are running at the execution time, the compiler is going to give you an error that your length is, the subscript is larger than the length minus 1. So now it is going to print, like sometimes we may run this program and we are getting this error. This is why, because of this only, using a subscript larger than the length minus 1, the last element. Right. Next thing we will have in this is, let us use the array concept in our program. Array length is specified at compile time. I told you you need to specify the length of an array, and it is, the space is also allocated at the compile time only when you have defined that or created that array. So int array is defined. Array name is array1. How much elements did it have? That is 10. Right. Now array length specified at runtime. Now suppose we have not defined it. What we are going to do is, we are going to use that size variable instead of any value. Right. Suppose in size you may increase it later on. Right. 10, 20, 30, 40, you may directly assign it to the size variable, and the size is given as a subscript. In the subscript you may define it as a number, a length. Right. So this is another method when you are defining the length or the size of the elements at runtime especially. So you may take the input size from the user. Like suppose size I am taking, the number of size I am taking from the user, and then we are allocating at the runtime. Let us see some programming tips behind that. Use singular arrays names. Now, using singular rather than plural names for arrays improve readability. Like score 3, then scores 3. So it would be like, if your array is already a collection of contains the elements. So why to use as a plural? Always use singular names for defining an array. It is easy to read. Score 3, then scores 3. Now why to have scores 3? Score 3 means an array that is holding the elements in the array, but you are pronouncing it as score 3. Then let us see initializing an array's values in its declaration. Now when you are defining that array, you are at the same time you are initializing it also. Can be initialized by putting a comma separated list in the braces. So you have braces, within that braces you are going to define the values as well. Uninitialized elements can be assigned some default values, example 0 for int arrays. Right. Explicit initialization is recommended. The length of an array is automatically determined when the values are explicitly initialized in the declaration. So it is basically double, then it is defined as an array, and reading is the array name, and you are putting the values into the array itself. So there are 3 floating point numbers in the array. Then you are just printing that length part of that particular array, that is reading dot length. right? So it is going to print 3. Why? Because there are 3 elements in the list. Let us see some looping concept while using array. Initializing array elements in the loop. For loop is commonly used to initialize array elements. Int I, it is basically used as a array index, or you may say as a counter also, looping counter, yes. So int a is equal to new int 10. What is that? First we have defined the variable that is I. Then you have defined an array of 10 elements in the second statement. In the third statement, you are going to run that program. Now, what is this length does? So, it is holding that a dot length. So, length of the array is what? Length of the array is 10. So, it is saying length of a. Now, length of a is what? 10. And then it is going to increment that part and initializing first element with 0. Right? So do not count on default initial values for array elements. Explicit initialize elements in the declaration or in a loop itself. Right. So these are some programming tips while you are defining the variables or while you are using the looping concept with arrays. Now let us see some summary. Let us see some very important points from an array. An array may be thought of as a collection of variables all of the same time. Like if I am talking about in this uh, example, you may see like all the values are of same type. That is floating point number, decimal point number. Right. So this is the main meaning of this definition. An array is also may be thought of as a single object with a large composite value of all the elements of the array. You may have a single object holding a large number of values. Arrays are objects created with new in a manner similar to objects discussed previously. You have seen how new keyword is used while for creating the arrays. Then we have array indexes use zero numbering. I told you the first index of the array that starts with 0. So index I refers to I plus 1th element. Why? Because we are starting with 0. The index of the last element is length of the array minus 1. Why? Because we are starting with the 0 index. Any index value outside the valid range of 0 to minus length minus 1 will be giving an error. I have shown you in the previous program also it is going to cause an error that is called array index out of bound error. When we have the length and the value is larger than the length. A method may return an array. You may have a method that returns an array. A partially filled array is one in which values are stored in an initial segment of the array. So we will be having more programs on this point, on each and every point, like use an int variable to keep track of how many variables are stored. Right. So you may be having some counter like we have used in for loop. And then we are calculating the length of that particular array. Right. So in this session, I think you have learned about how we define arrays. The main part, that is what is subscript. How we access the index of that array. If I want to access each element from the array, I may be using some for loop. If I want to access only single element, I may be using its index. So this is how we are going to use it. So these are some very important points while initializing an array. Let us see the next points. An array element can be used as an argument to a method any place the base type is allowed. So we have understood like int square brackets, right? If the base type is a primitive type, the method cannot change the array element. You cannot change it and you cannot have a different values in that array. That may be coming in the later points. If the base type is a class, the method can change the array element. So if it is a type, it is a class. So you can change the elements, but you cannot change if it is defined as a primitive type. When you want to store two or more different values, possibly different data types for each index of an array, parallel arrays can be maintained. Use a class that have multiple types. But single array, you cannot have in a single array the different data types. Array definition itself says it's a homogeneous collection of data items, right? So from from the previous slides, from the previous topics, we have understood the concept of arrays. What are the pros basically? What are the advantages of arrays? Plus, what are the disadvantages of array also? So let me tell you the advantages and disadvantages. The first advantage is you can organize your data, right? Like if you are holding 100 records and 100 records or 100 marks of 100 students, like you are storing the 100 students subject marks, you can maintain an array and organize your data, and efficiently you can use it using the subscripts of an array. Using indexing, you can directly access that particular item, right? What is the disadvantage behind it? We have understood the in detail. We have understood like what is subscript, what is bound, or like array, out of bound arrays, the index is out of bound. Why? Because the length is more than that part. So we are defining the size of the array at compile time, right? And it automatically stores, once you initialize that part, the size of the array, it occupy the space in the memory. Whether you are putting any value into that array or not, it doesn't matter. Once you have defined the size of an array, it automatically occupy the space in the memory. So your memory is basically not free at that time when you are using or when you are defining other arrays or defining other variables, right? So this is one of the disadvantage of that. While for efficient access of data, we can use arrays. We can perform arithmetic operations on arrays. Like if we want to add anything, because you may be using numpy like in later classes with other libraries you may be using. So you can have manipulation operations that can be performed on arrays, right? So hope you have understood what are arrays, what is indexing, what is how to use arrays with for loop, what are the different errors that may arise. The most important part, what is the subscript range, what is the index, what is the subscript of the first element, what is the subscript of the last element, how we calculate the length of an array, right? Hope you like the session, and we will be having more sessions on this arrays on one dimension and you may say n dimensional arrays, right? Thank you.